I'm going to call the November 15, 2023 Williamsburg Planning Commission meeting to order. Heather, would you call the roll, please?
Mr. Hamilton?
Here.
Mr. Kale?
Here.
Mr. Tarley?
Here.
Mr. Boswell?
Here.
Mr. Granger?
Here.
Ms. Liebel?
Here.
Thank you. I'm going to move along to the approval of minutes from our October 18th meeting. I think there was a change or two to the minutes that were originally posted. Are there any other edits that anyone would like to make? Hearing no edits, can we have a motion? Is there a motion to approve the October 18, 2023 minutes as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Kale?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. We have an open forum, and I will go ahead and open the open forum since I have to. But there is nobody here to speak at the open forum, I believe. This is your opportunity. She's shaking her head. No? Last chance? Second chance? No? Okay, so I'm going to close the open forum. We don't have any consent agenda items today, so that'll move us along to our only public hearing for the day, which is PCR 23-024. Ms. Griffin, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chairman Boswell, members of the Planning Commission. The city is submitting PCR 23024 for your consideration this afternoon. The outdoor dining guidelines will be presented as a chapter in the design review guidelines for the Architectural Review Board. These guidelines will provide the process and design requirements for outdoor dining and seating in the public right-of-way in specific areas in the city. And I wanted to go over first why this is happening and why we're doing this at this time. Every 2 years, the City Council embarks on a strategic planning process where they identify goals and objectives for the city. And just last year, we came up with our 23-24 GIOs. It stands for Goals, Initiatives, and Outcomes. And under the goal of creating a modern city, one of the things that City Council called for us to do was to convert the successful temporary outdoor dining along Prince George Street, the 400 and 500 block, into a permanent solution. And so the Economic Development Director embarked on that earlier this year. And with that, we wanted to make sure that we have design guidelines for those outdoor areas and also design guidelines for sidewalk cafes. Currently, sidewalk cafes are in Chapter 15 of the city code, but there are no guidelines that really differentiate what has to happen with the seating and with the tables and with the lighting. So along with making sure that we had design guidelines for what we're calling parklets, the areas that are designated parking spaces that have been converted to outdoor dining on the 400 and 500 block, we wanted to make sure that we have design guidelines for all of those areas. So I wanted to start first with the history of outdoor dining, and this is really dealing with first on Prince George Street, and then I'll talk about sidewalk cafes. During the COVID-19 pandemic, as we all know, thinking of it now, it seems so long ago, but it wasn't that long ago, just 3 years ago, there was a restriction on indoor seating for restaurants. And because of that, we wanted to make sure, a lot of localities wanted to ensure that our restaurants did not go under, and so we began to create policies under an emergency order that allowed us to have seating on the outside of a restaurant. And specifically on Prince George Street, this was the 400 block and the 500 block were allowed to do that. And so we started to allow this. Now that the pandemic is over and we still have outdoor dining there. We know it's very popular. We heard from one business that actually 18% of their revenue, one restaurant, 18% of their revenue comes from outdoor dining. And so we met in April with the 400 block residents and also some 500 block property owners. And before I go into that, what went well with that? Well, we know that it activated the street, it increased seating and service capacity, and it also increased the revenue during the pandemic, which I just told you about. So now, what we did, we came up with some design guidelines, and really the renderings and what you see out there now on the 400 block is an in-house design. We did research to determine the best practices for allowing restaurants to have seating on the outside, and then we held stakeholder meetings, which I mentioned. For the draft of the design guidelines, we drafted these, staff drafted them. We talked amongst ourselves in planning with the city manager, with the Economic Development Office, also with the city attorney's office and the city engineer and the building official before we provided these to the ARB. The ARB held 3 meetings for them to review. They provided us revisions, and we had public input. People came to the meeting and gave their view of what we should change. And some of those changes were incorporated into the final document. At their October 24th meeting, the ARB did approve the design guidelines. And I'm not going to go through all of the guidelines. They're 9 pages. Thanks to Mr. Hamilton, he did find on page 9, item number 6. I actually typed out my note there, so you'll see item number 6 has been corrected online. But item number 6 makes no sense because it was my note to make sure that I took something out. So that's been corrected. Otherwise, the guidelines are as the ARB approved. There are 9 different pages. There are 10 different sections, and these are the topics of the sections. We go into, well, the ARB has gone through great detail to make sure that everything that they could think of that someone might do that would be in violation of the character that is in keeping with downtown Williamsburg is in the guidelines. So here we have the barriers, we have the furniture, colors, we also have the application process, we have shade structures, which deals with pergolas and also deals with umbrellas. We have where lighting is approved, what type of lighting, the warmth of the lighting, and then heating options. And so with that, staff does recommend approval of PCR 23024. One, because it's in keeping with the overall character of the Williamsburg downtown, and it also has been approved by the ARB. And lastly, it does complete one of our GIOs for outdoor dining. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Please.
This only relates to Prince George Street.
This relates to Prince George Street as far as parklets are concerned, but Chapter 15 in the code already relates to Prince George Street lying between North Henry Street on the east and Armistead Avenue on the west, or Duke of Gloucester Street between Henry Street on the east and the intersection of Jamestown, Boundary, and Richmond Road on the west. All of those areas can have sidewalk cafes. Right now, the only areas that can have parklets are along Prince George Street. Does that answer your question? Okay. And just another caveat, I did not mention, because it's really not a part of this, but just in case there's someone that wants to know, the businesses or the property owners did not have to rent the parklets. The parklets are for rent. They're $5 a square foot. A license agreement is required between the owner of the business and also the city council. One of those have already gone before city council. If the property owner or the business owner does not want to rent the parklet, then that area will become a parklet, but it will be public space. So the city will maintain that, and we will put the furniture in accordance to the ARB guidelines, and it will not be rented. So they don't have to rent if they don't want to. Of course, the businesses that are making the revenue have decided to continue to rent.
What do you see as the market for the parklets, other than just the existing or pop-ups that could use it? No. The two that what we did is before we brought this out, the Economic Development Director and myself met with the restaurant owners to determine who would want to rent the parklet. So right now, of the businesses along Prince George Street, 2 businesses want to rent. The other 2 parklets that'll be along where Retros and Baskin Robbins area, those will be open to the public for public seating and public dining. But the other 2, in front of the Barkery and in front of Amber Ox, if they decide to sign the contract, then will only be set aside for their patrons. Does that answer your question?
What is the duration of the contract between the restaurant owner and the city?
It's 5 years.
5 years. So that speaks to your question about pop-ups. Somebody's not going to write a 5-year contract for a pop-up.
And if I'm correct, it also can't be subleased. I believe that's from anyone else. Not anyone else.
I guess I'll ask a follow-up question to that. If they've signed a 5-year lease and they only have a year left on their other lease, how does that work?
I think that would be a question for Ms. Shelton to answer that. I am not sure, or our counsel here. And I said Ms. Shelton only because I know that she wrote the agreement.
You can't see me smiling under my mask.
I cannot
Didn't mean to throw him under the bus.
see you smiling.
He was anticipating getting a question, so I think that's fine.
Fair question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Granger, I think that would have to be worked out between the business and the city because those would be two different dueling. I'm not sure what the termination clause is in the special use agreement or the contract between the city and the business, but we can certainly look into that. I'm not sure what the termination clause says with relation to their existing rental of the business space.
Okay, I appreciate it. I could just see a challenge if somebody is leasing the parklet and they no longer have a leasable interest in a brick and mortar space.
Yeah, I'm sure that was considered by the city attorney's
Yeah,
office.
I mean, the smart thing to do would be to recognize that and to give them an option if their primary lease terminates, then they have the option to terminate the parklet lease. That would be the smart way to do it. And you
Maybe
could-
the
you could do that-
requirement
you
to
could do
terminate
it
their parklet
contractually.
lease.
Well, possibly, yeah. But anticipating that would be the smart way to go, clearly, yeah. So-
I will say this, that, like I said, the city council did approve their first lease agreement at their last meeting with Amber Ox, and I know that the attorney's office now is working on the second lease with the Barkery, and we'll go back and we'll make sure that that's included in there, if it's not already.
Great. Good example for my contract law students. Okay, other questions? Other questions? Ms. Liebel, since you have our seat on the ARB, anything you'd like to add about it? You were involved in all this at that level.
The guidelines are incredibly detailed because of the concern about things like the lighting and the idea that a restaurant might want to use the parklet for food preparation, which we were concerned about because they're not allowed to do that. So that's why it took us 3 meetings to get through them all. And the detailed level that we've got, I'm sure we're going to miss something. Somebody's going to come up with something weird that they're going to want to be able to do. But we think we covered every potential possibility. So.
Human nature being what it is, we'll just have to wait and see. Okay. Other questions for Ms. Griffin? Okay, hearing no other questions, I'll ask, is there a motion to recommend approval of PCR 23-024 as submitted?
So moved.
Second.
Mr. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Kale?
Aye.
Mr. Tarley?
Aye.
Mr. Boswell?
Aye.
Mr. Granger?
Aye.
Ms. Liebel?
Aye.
Okay, thank you. That moves us down to the commissioner reports. I understand we don't have an EDA today. I think we've heard from the ARB, and that's wonderful, Mr. Granger. I think your TDF duties are done since City Council has approved everything that you all recommended, and that just leaves me with a temporary appointment to the Williamsburg Public Arts Council, which I understand cannot function without input from the Planning Commission, as I understand from Heather. So Mr. Hamilton has kindly agreed to serve on that council, at least until we have, that's the one that Mr. Sokolowski was serving on, and that's, and once his seat is filled, we'll look at adjusting that. We have some hearings coming up in December, so you can look at that. Anything else that we need to discuss today? Hearing none, we're adjourned. Thank you.